At the very, very end, last couple pages, he says, where do we start? What if we got back to honoring the power of men and their place in society and the power of women and their place in society? We can't recover this kind of Christian medievalism if we can't stay faithful to our marriages. We can't recover this Southern Christendom in the right sense if we're not in fellowship with our kids and our grandkids, if we're not still walking in the ways of our fathers and our grandfathers.
Welcome to The Right Stuff, everyone. We're glad to have you with us today. Today, I have the privilege of talking with my friend, colleague, office partner, Toby Sumpter. You folks probably already know Toby, but Toby's the pastor of King's Cross and the host of the Cross Politics Show, among other things. So, Toby, thanks for talking with me today.
Thanks for asking.
The topic of our discussion is this book, The Southern Tradition at Bay, A History of Postbellum Thought by Richard Weaver. Richard Weaver is most well known for his book, Ideas Have Consequences. It's kind of a famous book, but this was his dissertation. Right. And I had the privilege of being put onto this book by you. Yeah. You came back from vacation in Hawaii.
Yes.
I said, how was it? I said, awesome. And you're like, I'm reading this great book. And as soon as you mentioned it and some of the thoughts in it, I went and got it out of the library at New St. Andrews College, and then bought my own copy. And we had such a good conversation. I said, we should talk about this on the podcast.
Yeah, man. Thanks for asking.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like, I'm not sure, it sounds like my trip to Hawaii was as fun as some, I don't know. I'm not sure if that's a good advertising or not. It was my 25th anniversary. I barely read. But but I did peek into this. We had downtime.
Yeah.
We did some reading.
Yeah. Well, this is fascinating on several levels. Number one, I'm from Florida, and Florida is actually a part of the South, particularly the area I was from. Yeah. And so I had an affinity here. Right. You're not from the South, but you studied in the South, right? Didn't you?
I went to seminary at Erskine in South Carolina.
Yeah. So that was like your taste of the South.
Yeah, my 2-year sojourn. Yeah, in the South. My wife's born and raised in Maryland, and Maryland, of course, is a border state. But Maryland, embraced Southern roots, even though they, weren't part of the Confederacy. Yeah. Still claim, south of the Mason-Dixon line, and so her, we have family that goes back, to the Confederacy and so on. So, so some roots, some
There's
connections.
Some history there.
Yeah.
We could get into a lot. The most interesting thing, I think, is its applications to the present day. And Weaver here, it was interesting that this is his dissertation. He went on to, I think, be a professor at Chicago. Mm-hmm. And Ideas Have Consequences is a juggernaut. And this is really good, too. Just to get folks started, I'm going to read a little bit of the back so you can understand what the book's about. It says, while Richard M. Weaver is best known for the classic Ideas Have Consequences, the foundation of his career was this study of his native South, calling the Southern tradition the last non-materialist civilization in the Western world. He traced its roots to feudalism, chivalry, religiosity, and aristocratic conventions. The Old South, he concluded, may indeed be a hall hung with splendid tapestries in which no one would ever care to live, but from them we can learn something of how to live. Yeah. So let's just start with what grips you about the book. What did you like about this particular work?
Yeah, well, I think it's intriguing because of Ideas Have Consequences, because that's such a well-known book, and that this was something that the introduction or preface says that he actually worked to try to get published throughout his life. It never was actually published during his life. It was published posthumously, I think 3 years after his death. But it was something that was near and dear to him, clearly. He was from the South. But it just kind of a lesser known thing. I think there's a certain caricature of the lost cause, whatever that tradition / that you might think, I don't really know if I want to read that. I'm not really know. I mean, if they're just trying, the South will rise again, let's get the Confederacy going again. It's sort of, just there's all kinds of reasons why I'm not really interested in that. But Richard Weaver is just a different caliber of thinker. And so that was immediately intriguing to me. That's the thing that I think that got my attention was, he's writing this like a kind of defense of the South, but it's not. He's not a romantic. All right, so that would be the problem with a lot of that kind of literature. Would be it's highly romanticized, maybe bitter, unrealistic, whatever. But Weaver's like, no, it's he cares about the truth. He cares about objectivity. And so that was the thing that intrigued me about the idea. I bought the book several years ago. Someone had mentioned it as being a helpful thing, so I just grabbed it, put it on my shelf, but I didn't get around to it till just this summer. What you just read from the back of the book, that's another intriguing thing. It's the last non-materialistic civilization, drawing its roots from medieval feudalism. All that was intriguing. So it's a real it's a real academic work. I mean, he as you've seen, I mean, like the number of people that he mentions that you and I have never heard of is impressive. I mean, there's a handful, Dabney, sure, I've heard of Dabney, and there's, and you've heard of the great generals, but there's dozens, if not hundreds, of names of authors, essayists, novelists, poets, soldiers, moms, dads, and he takes a cross section of the whole South in order to make his case. Essentially, that I would say that the Southern people, broadly speaking, were a Christian people, and they believed in a way of life that was established by God, and that's what made it something that they were willing to believe in and fight for in their particular place and circumstances. And so along the way, of course, he's also will in mild ways say the Confederacy did not think of itself as primarily fighting for slavery. It's not a central part of the book, but it's there along the way. Most Southerners thought, no, we're fighting for our way of life, for a covenantal view of authority, that the states had covenanted together under this Constitution and hadn't relinquished their authority as a state. And they saw the North as deciding to overthrow that authority. Saw the North becoming kind of like Great Britain had become during the War for Independence, and so wanted to defend their home, their family, that way of life. I found it to be incredibly helpful and enlightening.
Yeah. Weaver actually says in the introduction, I think it's in the introduction or the end, he critiques the South on what they did wrong, particularly at the end. He said they lacked initiative, which made sense. So you had Puritanism marking the North, and that Puritanism was diligent, it was industrialized, and it was like strongly rational. Like you had kind of the idea of an independent, rational. Really, at that time, seemed anti-covenantal. Used the term covenantal,
right? Where
the South was feudalistic in its structure, and that's kind of the hallmark. He says right off the bat, if you're going to understand it, you have to understand the feudal nature of the South. And you think plantations, and you have all these different ideas that come up about plantation owners, but that mapped the way things used to be in England, and there was actually that kind of thing going on. But in that feudal structure created allegiances, local loyalties. These are my people. And that can be extended even to the idea of how you go about work. Is it a pure social contract with the plethora of contracts that now exist in the way that the United States operates? And I contract you to do a job. And because there's no real deep allegiances and loyalties, and even the idea of a family working together on a project, and I'm hiring you to do a job, well, I have to stipulate every single thing that you are going to do and not going to do, and it's going to be exactly for this amount of money. And then you get into lawsuits over the fact that something fell through in the contract. And he is going back to say, well, no, that feudal structure and the way people thought about who they were and who their people were is what I think the United States of America is trying to figure out now. And there's people that want to tie those who we are to the wrong kind of identity. But America is more than an idea. The idea that America is just an idea is kind of the rotten one, and I think would have been more representative of the North
Right.
than of the South.
Right.
But he critiques them and says, but you did lack initiative.
Right.
And that mapped my whole Southern experience. I mean, I lived in Florida my whole life before 3.5 years ago, moving to the Northwest. And there's a level of diligence with those who made it out west of the Rockies. The culture is just like,
Really?
it just goes, it drives. And there's something about the South. I think even the weather, it's like you don't have to prepare for winter.
Right.
Now you had to with crops and all of that. But
Sure.
you understand there's just a way that it's a slower pace,
Right.
Agrarian society. It's not industrialized.
Right.
But he critiques them, says if you would have had more initiative, then I think you could have seen your way of life, your worldview actually take root and be established. And then he dings them on education. He says, the education really wasn't there. So the idea of the province and the locality can result in the wrong kind of provincialism, where you really don't know what the world's like outside of your neck of the woods. Right. And that was kind of another problem.
The section on education I found really fascinating. He does. I felt like, curious what you think, but it felt like a sort of yes, but kind of thing where he notes that like they primarily valued education for creating basically statesmen and soldiers.
Yeah.
And that's what you need an education for. You need to know how to fight a war, and you need to know how to lead people. But beyond that, highly suspicious of academia.
Yeah.
And learning. And in part because of what was happening in the North, they were all into schools and education, and they were all becoming rationalists. Mm-hmm. And they were becoming deists and rejecting God, and then becoming these sort of cutthroat merchants and so industrialists. And so they said, we're not that. We believe in our way of life. And so the positive is it's personal, maybe more tied to the earth, seasons. The negative is it can be lazy, lack initiative, maybe be just irrational in certain respects. But they were highly skeptical of higher learning. And of course you have in Germany and in the mainland, in the continent, people are literally apostatizing because of higher learning. And so they have this skepticism of learning. You learn because you're going to become a political leader, or you're going to become a general, a military leader. Yep. Like do something, which is kind of interesting with the initiative thing. It's like, that's an interesting, maybe tension.
Yep.
But then skeptical of much learning beyond that. Like, go to school to learn how to lead people, and be careful beyond that. And I found that really interesting for, thinking, I'm on the board at New St. Andrews, you teach at New St. Andrews. And I was thinking there's something there that probably is worth us chewing on more, because we talk about graduating leaders that shape culture. Mm-hmm. We graduate leaders, like that's what we want to do. Yep. And we need to have a kind of skepticism of higher learning. There's a kind of, when you don't have a goal or a mission or an enemy to fight, it can get in your head in a weird way, and you can, and you start speculating, and you get, minority studies departments,
mm-hmm.
Or whatever, like, the lesbian Eskimo bishop studies, like you're just like, how did that happen? Well, it happens because you don't have an application point. You don't have a point where you actually have to fight a bad guy or build something. Mm-hmm. Engineers, the suspension bridge has to work. The airplane has to actually fly. But in certain departments, it doesn't matter if it works or not. Mm-hmm. But I thought that was interesting. Related would be the view of religion that he also kind of unpacks as being kind of deeply respectful of the supernatural nature of it, and maybe to a slight fault of mm-hmm. And let's not think about it too much. Be careful, because the theologians that start thinking about it a lot end up becoming Unitarians or end up apostatizing. So, there's a God, sin, basic Calvinism, but let's just kind of keep it a little bit mysterious. And so again, like there's something there I would say, where do churches go to seed? and they're seminaries. Every time. Every time. It's like seminaries should be suspect. And we should study God's word. And so both those things need to be said, and so I think you have a yes but, or a this is a good intention or a good attempt. Here's the weakness, or here's where it goes to seed.
Yeah. The education chapter was enlightening. As Weaver was talking about, they were trained. The education was to serve the purpose of their society, and their society was feudalistic.
Right.
And so and I map that to NSA. When we say we want to graduate leaders, that's a particular kind of person. We believe in hierarchies. Right. Every organization has a hierarchy. Everyone that you're in has a hierarchy. And the lie of kind of, call it modernity, the Enlightenment, whatever, is you're this individual in the void.
Right.
And your education is about becoming the best you can be, something like that, or you doing something amazing in the world. And not all of that's bad, but the idea that no, you're in a world of hierarchical order, and we do want you to be leading at the top of those hierarchies, and that means you're going to be a generalist to some degree. A general in the army is not a good of sniper as the sniper. Now, maybe he did it at some point, and he was really good at it at some point.
He knows how it works.
And in every organization, if you're in a construction company and you're at the top of it, you better know how to swing a hammer to have the respect that you need. But you also have to do far more than that. And your education is mapping onto the structure of your society and what you're supposed to be doing with the people that you're doing it with. So how to lead men, that whole idea, which was good in the South. But at some point, if your education is not actually pressing up into, say, the newness of the world or what you actually need to learn to get the job done, you just become the manager. It becomes a bureaucracy.
Right. Something
like that falls through.
His related, and it's all connected, and I think it's in the same part of the book, but he mentions the Southern disdain for secular democracy. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that they were already identifying that, in the early 1800s during the war and following the war. Secular democracy is the great enemy. I think it was Dabney, he quotes at one point, who called John Locke that baptized atheistic philosopher.
There you go. I second that motion.
And the leaders of the French Revolution were known as the infidel Democrats. But they saw it, coming. They said it's secular democracy. But the idea is that if there's basically, as the Puritans apostatized, which the descendants of the Puritans did in New England, and denied God or denied any kind of active God or present God, intentional God, that leaves a void. And in society, and that means that basically the people can decide, and so that immediately goes into this egalitarianism or equalitarianism, and a destruction of hierarchies. And the Christian South said basically, if there's no God, then you have chaos and tyranny. If there's no God, you have chaos and tyranny. You don't. There's no reason to respect your form of law if there was no God above, if there's no God above. But they said there is a God. God has created, he's spoken, and he's established this hierarchical world. And so because God made it that way, established that way, it demands our submission. It demands our obedience to it. But if it hasn't done that, if God has not established the world that way, then we don't owe it anything. And so for them, it was directly connected. They wanted they saw the nature of a feudal society, the nature of a hierarchical society, tied directly to the fact that there is a God and he's over everything. He's established these differences both between male and female, between owners and servants, between managers and workers and generals and soldiers.
Are pre-established,
right,
non-voluntary societies.
But they all exist because there's a God.
Yeah.
But if there's no God, then everything does just dissolve into this, a drawer of BBs.
Yep.
And, and yeah, you're told, hey, be the best BB you can be, dream a little dream, whatever.
Yeah.
But they said, but who cares then?
Yeah. And the South didn't think that way. So look,
Right.
provocative thing from Weaver here in the introduction, that no man was ever born free and no two men ever born equal is a more sensible saying than its contrary.
Right.
But born free and born equal is still the bread and butter of most modern Americans and how they're thinking. Right. And Weaver also said that another fault with them is that they never established kind of the ultimate grounding for how they operated as a society. They just thought, well, this is self-evident, but they didn't defend it.
Right.
And what he meant by that is he said they actually needed a Burke. They needed Edmund Burke.
Right.
And I don't know how much folks are into political philosophy or not, but I went nuts. So after this book, I went nuts and went to Thomas Hobbes, read Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, who's mid-1600s. Mm-hmm. He's there in England. I think he has to flee. And Hobbes is at least one of the earliest that I can find that says there's a state of nature. And that there's a real state of nature. Now, he said it would be nasty, brutish, and short. Right. So that infamous saying comes from Hobbes. Right. But in that state of nature, every man has a right to everything.
Right.
Okay. So
they're selfish.
There's no civil law.
Right.
And you have like a genuine right to everything, according to Hobbes. You have a genuine right to everything. There's no marriage. There's no idea like that. It's just individual man in the void with a right because he has liberty. The definition of liberty gets inflated in the state of nature, and you're free to do whatever whatever you want.
Right.
And he says, well, that's not good for anybody. So we have to come together through a social contract, through agreement. We lay down those rights that we have to everything, and we enter in out of the state of nature into the state of society with a leader. Now, for Hobbes, that was Leviathan. That was a king. Yeah. And when you hand over your rights and liberties for him, it's done.
It's gone.
It's done. He's whatever he says goes. The king is not under the law, so he's not very, he's not Rutherford.
No.
But he doesn't go there. And then Locke, who's shortly after Hobbes, same spot there in England, late 1600s, says the exact same thing. Right. There's a state of nature. Yeah, except for him, it's not quite nasty, brutish, and short. Right. You're still governed by the natural law in a state of nature. But then for Locke, you're like, what is a state of nature, man? Like, what is it? And he's, or what is the natural law that you're governed by? And he's like, reason.
Yeah,
that's just it. It's just reason, reason in the void. And you're like, what is that? And so you have no divine law that's governing your state of nature. And Locke says you come in the same way, and you leave the state of nature to voluntarily enter into this contract thing. And then Burke comes right after them, and his reflections on the revolution in France. And this is where I saw, like this is a Burkean, like the South was full-fledged Burkean. Yeah. On this point, Burke says, no, basically none of that's true. We are people of untaught feelings. We are what we are because of our fathers. We are in call it a contract, but a better word would be covenant. We are in the covenantal arrangements, the social arrangements that were established by our fathers. Right. And God overruling that. Like here we are in these kind of pre-voluntary arrangements. Right. With allegiances to our tradition, with allegiances to our people. And he's just railing on the revolution in France and saying, because of this crazy, he says, we don't trust the structure of society demands reason because we don't think every man has enough of it. Right. He just, you don't have enough, very highly suspicious of reason. And having that kind of local loyalties. I was like, it made great sense to me why Weaver said the South needed Burke. Right. Like they needed
a Burke. They didn't have a Burke. Yeah. I remember reading, I've not read the entirety of Hobbes and Locke, but the thing that my takeaway from from the sections that I read was it's striking how they're both individualists. And so state of nature, exactly. The difference being Hobbes still had kind of a weird and perverse doctrine of sin, and Locke effectively threw it out. Mm-hmm. So Locke's also the one that says that we're all born with a blank slate, tabula rasa. And so he has a very optimistic view of man and reason. And so because of that, he arrives at he believes that the government can be very small and limited. So the sort of idea of limited government kind of comes from Locke, but it's because Locke didn't have a doctrine of sin. Thought people were pretty reasonable, and they'd look around and be like, "Well, I don't want people to steal from me, so I won't steal from them. I don't want people to kill me, so I won't kill them." And he says, the basic rights of life, liberty, and property. So we get from Locke. He says you're going to have a pretty small government because people will figure it out. And so, and I think in terms of bring it down to the present, modern. The classical view of liberalism. So classical liberalism sees John Locke as its father, and traditionally believed in a limited government. And there's some critics pointing out rightly that John Locke's version of that is terrible because he didn't believe in original sin. Hobbes was better on that. Hobbes was like, no, people are terrible. They're selfish brutes. They're going to steal. They're going to kill. So you have to surrender all your rights and be subsumed into the Leviathan monster. Yep. Otherwise, there's no peace. It's interesting how they both get little pieces. They both use language of social contract, but neither one of them understand covenant. Covenant, both on the negative side, we all fell in the covenant of creation. So we have this sin problem. And then the idea that we're not just these solo individuals, but we are born into what Burke calls all these partnerships, partnerships of family, partnerships of business, school, nation, and so forth. It's striking. I'm curious what you think about this. You mentioned this before, but this is the first book I think I can remember where I guess it kind of helped me understand a little bit more how Puritanism got a bad rap. Oh yeah, because it was, because I'm constantly, yay Puritans, yay the Puritans. The Puritans were awesome, but here in the South, they frequently saw New England as it was this sort of Puritanism gotten to seed. It was Puritanism, all the strengths of it,
all the rigor of it,
but then take out the grace, take out the word of God, take out the gospel, and it goes really pharisaical, it goes antagonistic, it goes cruel. But it was like, historically I can kind of get now, like, okay, that's how Puritanism gets a bad name in part. I mean, Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter, of course, helps, and other caricatures and slanders. But it's like, that's helpful. Also, he points out that in terms of both immigration and then also worldview, the Southern tradition saw itself more as the Cavalier tradition from the English Civil War, whereas they saw the North as being more of that separatist Puritan, Roundhead, whatever. And so so the war between the states is seen as a little bit of a recapitulation of the English Civil War, even though the South wasn't exactly, they weren't monarchists per se, but they were hierarchists.
Yeah,
and so in one place Weaver says you might hear echoes of the divine right of kings, and he says not kings per se, but of hierarchy, a divine right of authority. And if God had established the authority, then you better obey. Whereas the North was these levelers, the French Revolution, just rip it all out. Let's just destroy it all. That's the only way.
Yeah, I think a lot of it goes back to the separatist Puritans, because there were Puritans that wanted to stay in the Church of England, but the separatists that therefore you're pulling away from tradition, you're pulling away from the entity that is, and then the separate Puritan independence. Which Owen was an independent, that kind of thing. Right. I think that's definitely going on there in the North. Yeah.
And then you had Puritans that switched sides too in the middle of the English Civil War, who started out on the side of the Parliament, and then they went so radical they switched back over, and we're not going in for that.
Yeah, but I think that's the point. So let's take that, and I want to talk about Lee for a minute, Robert E. Lee, and then our modern situation.
Okay. Yeah,
so that tied to Lee, who was known to call Virginia his country.
Right.
Okay. Just a story about Lee. People might not know this. It's fascinating. I'm going to D.C. In just a couple days to preach at the first service of Christ Kirk, D.C. And one of the places I'm going to go is to Lee's house, which is in Arlington Cemetery. Yeah. Okay. So, if you're at the White House, it's probably a 5-minute carriage ride from the White House where Lincoln was across the Potomac to the west, 5 minutes. Ish, and you are at Lee's house.
Yeah.
And of course, Lincoln, so go back and imagine what that would have been like. Lincoln offers Lee the Union Army. I'm pretty sure they had a meeting. I think,
Right.
leave your house, go across the Potomac, meet with the President of the United States. You get offered the whole Union Army, and get in your carriage, drive back across to your house where your wife is. And it's a big, beautiful, mansion-like place.
Yeah.
And say, well, dear, pack it up. Pack up the luggage.
Yeah.
We, I've heard people say that Lee never really even considered it.
Right.
And then Weaver has this great letter that Lee wrote, I think his sister, right?
Yeah.
Let me see if I can find it. But you can hear like the allegiances. It's all about how Lee is thinking about himself. So this is a letter from Robert E. Lee to his sister. He says, "My dear sister, I am grieved by my inability to see you. I've been waiting for a more convenient season, which has brought to many before me deep and lasting regret. We are now in a state of war, which will yield to nothing. The whole South is in a state of revolution, into which Virginia, after a long struggle, has been drawn. And though I recognize no necessity for this state of things, and would have forborne and pleaded to the end for the redress of grievances, real or supposed, yet in my own person I had to meet the question whether I should take part against my native state. With all my devotion to the Union and the feeling of loyalty and duty of an American citizen, I have not been able to make up my mind to raise my hand against my relatives, my children, and my home."
Yeah.
And then he goes on and says a few more things to her. Right. But you can just imagine being there and saying, well, the way he thought was, I'm a Virginian, right? And yes, we entered in and we agreed to this Constitution. We agreed to be in and we can agree to be out. But my biggest loyalties and allegiances are to my people,
right?
And I can't take up my hand against them. So so they left. He and his wife, and I can't remember, his wife is like the granddaughter, great granddaughter of George Washington, I think, something like that, or George Washington's nephew, I can't remember. But I believe the story goes, they retreated to the South. Okay, you're at a state of war. Your husband's now at a state of war, leading the Southern Army against the Union. And she sent, I think it was property tax by courier, like to pay for the land and the house. Okay. And the Union Army, the North, whatever, they said, you have to pay in person. And they confiscated his land. So they confiscate Lee's house, his land. You see Union Army men at his occupying his house. And then when the first men died in the Civil War, they buried, both North and South, they buried them on his land.
Really?
And that is the beginning of Arlington Cemetery. After the war, I think it was Lee's wife's father who sued and said, you confiscated our land, illegally. And, the Union admitted wrongdoing and gave the land back.
Okay.
And then that guy sold the land back to the federal government. And that's how it became Arlington Cemetery. But, just fascinating to see that. But Lee's sentiments, like applying to our modern day, I go back, I watched Tucker's interview with Texas Senator Cruz.
Ted Cruz.
And this was back, the Iran thing, which is already yesterday's news. But I find Tucker is representing that America first, keep our house in order. Why are we going and fighting this war? Is it abstracted? It feels industrial, the military-industrial complex that we talk about. Right. And I'm picking up another book by Samuel Huntington called Who Are We? Like talking about an American identity. Mm-hmm. And this particular moment with Generation Z coming, I'm seeing all of this stuff at work. Right. People are like, what is an American? Right. And strong movements to get rid of illegal immigration and even reduce legal immigration, which, of course, any nation's going to have to do to maintain its identity. But what are we? And we're not just this idea. It actually is connected to your people, to your traditions, to your way of life. And Huntington says, and after reading this, made great sense, we really weren't a nation until the Civil War.
Yeah.
And you hear kind of the way Lee's going, loyalty toward America, but I can't take up arms against my native state.
Right.
Like my native state is Virginia,
Right.
and those allegiances were there, but those same allegiances were not at a national level. They weren't in the South. The South didn't, hey, we love you, but you're more like cousins, and these are brothers.
Right.
And now that we're 160 years past the Civil War, I found that we're still having that conversation. Like, you have to yoke your allegiances now to the nation, because we really are one. So I want to go back to the Civil War and say, yeah, God did a thing. Like the South lost, and in so doing did not secede from the Union, and therefore the Union was established, and we were a new thing post Civil War, compared to pre Civil War. And conservatives have long been known to talk about state rights, and I still think that's a good thing. I'm there. But you can hear the younger generation, particularly those that are involved in politics, saying, it's kind of silly, guys. Like, you got to wake up and smell the roses. We are a nation. And what would it mean now? This is where the Christian nationalism piece comes in. What would it mean to actually recover some sense of a feudalistic structure, a hierarchical structure with God at the top, and us having that covenanted loyalty as a whole nation? I find that's the moment that we're in, and making sure that on the one hand, we don't fracture and secession, my states' rights superior to everything else. I think that would be a bad way. But the other option isn't going nationalism as an idea. Now it's got to be loyalties, allegiances, brotherhood on the whole scale.
Yeah. Part of the related to all this is what has God done, and so you have the history, and then you also have like technology, and so like now you travel far. It's hard to be provincial. Like how would like you would have to have no internet, have no TV, have no car. I mean, you'd have to be Amish, or something like that. And so now you simply aren't limited in a way that you were at that time. And so that's also what God has done. And now you have friends and connections that are across the country who are also Americans who live in Virginia or live in New York or live in Florida or California or Texas. And so that's part of what God has done too, and trying to figure that out. And at the same time, without just being apathetic and saying, well, this is just what God has done and there's nothing to be done about it. Because I think the if we can call it the heretical Northern, imperialism or commercialism or whatever, that's I think we're still in that pitched battle. The landscape's changed significantly. And the thing that we've got to figure out is how to be loyal to our people and to our place while living in this world.
Yeah.
And that's, so it's not just an idea at all. It's people, it's a place, it's a way of life. I found it, I thought it was really neat, refreshing. I mean, he's writing in the 60s, but, or before, but at the very, very end, last couple of pages, he says, where do we start? He said, well, maybe we could make a lot of progress if we rejected the, long-haired men and short-haired women, and just got back to, how about, he says, I think it'd be great if women assumed their rightful authority at the hearth of the home. And so it's not demoting. He quotes somebody who says, if we put trousers on women, the men will make them work in the fields. And he says, that's exactly what they did. And so he says, that was the demotion. But what if we got back to actually honoring male and female? What if we got back to honoring the power of men and their place in society and the power of women and their place in society? Which is at least a small, and I know people are always, what do we do politically? What do we, and there's a lot of questions, and I don't know the answers to them, but it has to be rooted in the way God actually made the world, which the most basic thing is male and female, marriage, family, loyalty to family. We can't recover this kind of Christian medievalism if we can't stay faithful to our marriages.
Yep.
We can't recover this Christian, this Southern Christendom in the right sense. If we're not in fellowship with our kids and our grandkids, if we're not still walking in the ways of our fathers and our grandfathers, that's going to, it's going to take a lot of work, but it means love of your people, love of your place, even while recognizing that God has moved the ground underneath us over the last couple hundred years.
Yeah. And I tell people, read Burke, like those, I mean, he actually says like, we are people of prejudice, and we love our prejudices because they're prejudices.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
and what I mean by that in the good sense, of course, I don't mean kind of like arrogant, ignorant prejudice.
Yeah.
But I mean, the vision that's laid out in this book, and then in some of the others that we've mentioned, is love your location, love your station,
because it's yours.
Because God, God gave it to you,
God gave it
and
to
because you're a finite creature, you're an embodied creature.
Right.
We just had our 4th of July parade right here in Moscow.
Right.
And I mean, it's like Americana straight to the veins.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like thousands of people turn out on Main Street, small little town, 25,000 people. And the kids are riding their bicycles. Everyone's decked out in red, white, and blue.
Yep.
National anthem. They actually had like a flyover from a little tiny plane.
Yep.
And a huge parade. People throwing candy, just celebrating who we are as a nation.
Right.
And you feel those allegiances start to flow.
Right.
And then you could apply this to whatever like business you're in, whatever organization.
Right.
Do you view those people as like kind of disembodied entities, cogs in a wheel that are getting a particular job done in the organization?
Right.
Or are the people under your authority that report to you, do you really love them?
Right.
Do you really know them? Like, turn your face toward the people that you're with,
Right.
and love them. You just this kind of thing makes you want to get out, smell the soil, love the flora and the fauna that's right around you.
Right.
And we definitely need to. I don't think that the grand danger in America right now is too much provincialism.
Right.
When you mentioned tech, I mean, tech is exactly what the North was experiencing with industrialization.
Right.
And so some of the reasons, like parents, if you think you need to train your children to use an iPhone, okay, I would start there. Like, I'm not a Luddite. They're going to use all these tools. Right. So your job is to actually equip them and train them to do it. But scale that thing. I mean, understand that you can be on your phone even a little bit and not doing anything naughty, but your allegiances and affections are doing something else.
Right.
You're messing around with ideas that come from the other side of the nation, or you're just in a different world, and that's fine. But I would say the same thing like with movies. We watch a lot of movies in our home. We love watching a movie. But if you sit and read to your children, something different is happening. Right. I just did a thing with Chris Wiley on like analog and digital.
Yeah.
That's another way to think of it. Like, if you're in the digital world, it is kind of like the abstracted world of the North.
Right.
If you're in the analog world and you are like actually reading the Bible,
right.
I for a long time now I'll play the Bible when I read it, and I'll have the audio going and I'm reading at the same time with my eyes. And that's great, but every now and then I've been pausing it and just reading it.
Right.
Right. And it's something closer is happening there.
Right.
And you want to do that with your family. You want your kids, your wife, your kids, your grandkids, and then your local community to have those kind of affections for each other.
What did you think about the very end? His last couple of pages, he kind of throws something in there where he's like, if we don't recover something like this, he says it's kind of striking. He says there are similarities between the Christian South and fascism. You catch that?
I don't remember that part.
Yeah, very end. And he says fascism uses materialistic tools. It weaponizes material. But he says fascism's actually kind of an ape of Christendom, is what he says. and it's kind of short. It's like in the last page and a half. He says what the American South was doing had a vision for this medieval sort of feudal Christian feudalism that is, he says, fundamentally, because it's particular and provincial and supernatural, not materialistic, it's therefore necessarily full of adventure. It's a life of action. You're not being. He says, liberalism and this globalism and sort of, he doesn't use that word, but universalizing tendency that we need to flatten everything out and make it all equal. He says this necessarily creates this. He uses the phrase cradle to grave care that is crushing to individuality and particularity, because in order for the government to take care of everything, there can't be that many variables. So it flattens everything. He says that's what the South saw the North doing, was flattening everything out because we got to make money, industrialization and so forth, and we're going to take care of it all. He says, but the South saw the glory of particularity. And he says fascism actually is sort of a cancerous version of that, kind of this tumor growth of it, because it has a vision of particularity too. You think of Italians, Germans, this idea though of place, blood, kin, a particularity. He says, if we don't recover something of this, these Southern principles, something will fill the void, because everybody will get bored of egalitarianism sooner or later. And if we don't paint the right picture, if we don't build Christendom, then another kind of hierarchy will emerge in the form of fascism.
That's fascinating. It reminded me, I'm reading H.L. Mencken on democracy right now. And so folks, I'm just starting it. But he's such a brilliant writer, and he's talking about, he abominates it. They say that what you need to fix the problems with democracy is more democracy. He's like, no, negative. But there's a guy at the end of the book that critiques Mencken. I mean, he likes Mencken. He says he's brilliant and all this stuff in the way that he writes. But he says he's asking for more of a more chivalrous, even a more maybe medieval structure. But the critique of Mencken is, he says, but Mencken is operating on the liberty of democracy and freedom of speech. And he says what Mencken wants doesn't have it, And so this guy, the guy that was critiquing Mencken, is just in a catch-22. He's saying you're going to have to choose for this kind of highly democratized, total liberty for everyone and without limits, or some like oppressive, medieval feudalism structure. And I'm thinking the whole time, the answer is covenant. The answer is a Christian society, a Christian commonwealth, that we believe these rights actually do come from God. He stipulates them. I should also mention here, it was interesting when we had a CNN lady come interview us. At one point, she just looked at us, and she was very sweet and very interested in our way of life. And she would just be a normal, I think, secular liberal probably. But she was like, do you guys view me as an equal? Do you view me as an equal? And it was a very funny moment. And we were like, well, yes. And I thought, man, I could have said it clearer when we interviewed her. But, that's everything these guys are talking about. Equal by what standard? The classic question. So we treat you equally according to the standard that God has revealed, which says we, by definition, have to treat you different because you're a woman. People should treat us different because we're men. And all these people, all these particularities are equal in the sense that there's a standard that's directing it. As soon as you get rid of the standard, to your earlier point, equal just means flat, same and flat, and every single,
and everything gets crushed. Everything becomes boring. Whereas in God's world, it's full of this diversity, and that's where the adventure is.
Yeah, it's alive. It's living. Well, Toby, it's been great. Folks, thanks for tuning in today. If you're interested, The Southern Tradition at Bay by Richard Weaver is a great work. And check out his Ideas Have Consequences as well if you haven't gotten into that. And thanks for joining us today.